welcome everyone to another episode of Closer Encounters. I am your host, Clarence Mitchell, coming to you live from somewhere in Minnesota. Would you like to be a guest on Closer Encounters? Or maybe you know someone that would like to be a guest on Closer Encounters. Or maybe you have a story to share. Well, please, shoot us an email. closerencounters.info@gmail.com. Again, that's closerencounters.info@gmail.com. For everything Closer Encounters, updates, all things going on, check us out, www.facebook.com/Closer Encounters Radio. Again, www.facebook.com/Closer Encounters Radio. And please don't forget to like, follow, and share. Well, hello and welcome everybody back to another episode of Closer Encounters. Hey, it's a special day today. We got a lot of new things going on. If you notice my post there that I sent out yesterday and stuff, we're actually on a new platform today. Very first time. I changed my studio around, as you can see a little bit. Sorry about the webcam. It's not the greatest in the world, but hopefully one of these days we'll change that up here. But as you know, today's a special day. We have a special guest with us, a man that a lot of you know, some of you may not know. Very well educated. He's written a lot of books, and he is now on the series of Ancient Aliens, which is really cool. So please, everybody, welcome with us, Mr. Bruce Fenton, if you would. Hello, Bruce. How are you, sir? Oh, we lost your microphone there, sir. Let's see here.
Oh, yep, sorry. Pleasure.
There you go.
There you go. Yeah, pleasure being on. Thank you for inviting me on, Clarence. Appreciate it.
Anytime. You know, it's been a while. I think the last time I had you on, we were with Blog Talk Radio. That's a long time ago.
Yeah, and I haven't been very active on Facebook either, so I haven't been in the groups much. So, we haven't seen each other much for a while. Popping in and now and again, checking on the Ancient Aliens groups and stuff, but yeah, not as much.
Sure. Cool. Fantastic. So what have you been up to for these past couple of years anyway?
Well,
yeah. Right?
Been quite busy. I mean, since publishing The Forgotten Exodus, Into Africa Theory, that was April 2017. So obviously that was dealing more with more down to earth aspects of the human story. And then, since then, it's been a lot of focus on the Ancient Aliens topic, evidence from genetics as to whether, we've been modified, as well as what's called now is called techno signatures, is the current buzzword. Basically, technological signatures of alien life. I've been looking into that a lot, and putting a lot of focus really in that area, and particularly. But life as well moves along. I've been moving house and doing all sorts of other, family stuff.
Right. Cool. Fantastic. So you're in your new house and everything. So how you like it?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, near the beach. We live in South Wales in the UK, and here you can affordably live by the beach, which is quite nice because obviously most of Europe and the US, it's pretty expensive to be on the coast, isn't it? So
Awesome. Pretty cool. Oh boy. Yeah, I watched the one video there of you on the other show that you were on here back in October, I think it was, or something. Yeah, that was a really nice talk that you had going on there. Really, really informative.
Gives a good overview, isn't it? It's that basically, for that one, for people who don't know, it was a Skeptico interview where I tackled both the books to a degree. Gives a bit of an overview, and actually doing a little bit of a collaboration with from Alex at Skeptico website, because we're working on a short, like a video presentation of the same information, but with sort of some slides and maybe some voiceover and stuff. So that will probably hopefully be ready in a couple of months or so. So that's another follow-up to that, which is kind of cool, which obviously I'll let you know when that's done, because hopefully people will appreciate that, because I know these days a lot of people don't like to read,
Exactly.
to listen. So
Right.
trying to cater for that a bit more. Be good to do audiobooks as well, of course. I know those are getting really popular. I listen to audiobooks myself. Obviously it's nice, isn't it? People can drive, they can listen, they don't have to be sitting there holding a physical book. So I realize that we live in a time when people prefer their their videos and their audios, don't they, really?
Yeah, it's fantastic. Now you're hooked up now with the Ancient Alien crew on the show, Ancient Aliens. How did that happen? I think it's fantastic, but walk us through that. How did they get a hold of you?
Sure. It's to be honest, I think it's largely thanks to Giorgio putting a word for me there at the team, because he was sort of aware of my research, and he sort of expressed interest in it. He quite likes some of what I'm doing with the particularly this evidence from genetics and stuff, because if people keep in mind that Giorgio's among a number of ancient aliens researchers who's kind of said, look, he expects the major evidence not to come from physical materials but from DNA, right?
Mm-hmm.
So and he's not the only one that thinks that. I think a lot of people, if you look over the years, you've got, of course, you've got Eric Van Daniken's tackled that a bit as well, the DNA side of it. So of course have famous writers like Sid Chin has obviously talked a lot about that DNA, and then Lloyd Pye, of course, who's sadly passed as well. But he went down that route quite a bit, talking about chromosome 2 fusions, and was there a possible link to Sasquatch and Bigfoot? Was that the unmodified hominins and stuff? So this is not a new idea. It's been flowing around a lot. But so Giorgio kind of was aware of that, and he noticed I was covering that in quite a serious way, and so he kind of reached out and said, would I be interested in being one of the guest experts? And so he must have spoken to the team there, and I got contacted from some of the producers and invited up to London, where we do the recording there. So I don't fly to the US, so it's not quite as which is kind of cool. Obviously don't have to do quite such a big journey as it would have required to get to their studios otherwise.
So they came to you, so to speak?
Yeah, so to speak. Yeah, they arrange. What they have is they do something where, look, they'll bunch together at least 3 people that they're going to be on the show, and they'll arrange a day in London for those people to come. So that way they don't need to get UK people to fly out to the US, or particularly fly over to interview one person. They'll round this up a little bit, and they'll get, because obviously you've got Hugh Newman, that's also he's a regular on the show, and he's based not that far away from where I am. He's down in Stonehenge, actually. He lives very near Stonehenge. Yeah, that's why he runs a lot of tours there. He actually lives there. And then you've got of course Andrew Collins as well, is UK based, and obviously he's a regular on the show. So they'll do is they'll find like at least 3 of those people that they need for different episodes, and they'll bring us all up to London, and do the shooting that way. So it's kind of cool. So yeah, it's nice to get there. It's a day trip, and yeah, usually there's a lot of really interesting questions that you obviously they don't necessarily make the show in the final cut, but to give you a sense of it, you're probably being asked questions and being filmed for about 2 hours.
Wow.
Something like that. So for me, it's been quite long interviews, and then at the end of that, as you know, that turns into maybe a couple of minutes or so. So obviously they have to really refine down from a lot of material. It gives an idea for people who wonder how much is cut from edit. I mean, there must be hours and hours and hours. Yeah, a lot. Must be a lot, enough to make a few movies,
Right. Well, I gotta ask you now: do they script you by any chance, or are you allowed to think and free will? I mean,
what they have is they have some questions that they already have in mind, but certainly with me, they've been quite sort of receptive to questions that I've suggested, things that I'm interested in, that I've looked at, and I've sort of bounced the ball back to them and said, what do you think about this or that? And so far, they've always included a lot of those questions, to put back to me. So they do seem genuinely interested in, what the researchers have to say. Right. But then, it's not necessarily up to that film team, to say what we'll get through. But so then it goes obviously to the producers and editors and everything. So they definitely there's a bit of sort of free play there, but it doesn't mean that necessarily that makes it through. It depends,
Right.
But yeah, no, certainly it's not scripted in the sense that, here's what we want you to say, or there's only our questions. There is quite a bit of flexibility, and I would say genuine interest from their producers as to things that, the researchers have found, and whether those might be relevant for the show. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I was kind of worried about that, how they actually work that stuff, and which is okay. I mean, I love it when people can actually be genuine and speak their mind, providing it stays in the show. Like you said, a lot of it winds up on the floor.
Yeah,
obviously. Yeah. Now I'm wondering though, out of all the stuff that you do, as far as working with them, do you think they keep some of that for other episodes?
I suspect so. Yeah, that's the thing. So you might find that next season, something that you said months ago appears in a show. Yeah, so they must keep that all in an archive, of stuff, so they can come back around, and use that. So that's why I assume that sometimes maybe we're seeing, footage that could be from months before that, when they make a new show, they go back and look to see what they've got. I assume that they do that. I mean, and now, as you've probably noticed, they're really increasing the number of episodes. I mean, this last season, I think it was like 30 episodes or something. So when you think about that, I mean, it used to be 12, wasn't it? 12 per year, basically.
Something like that,
yeah. And I think all in all, it's going to be something like about 40 over a 12-month period or something like that. Because I mean, we've now gone into another season, and it's season 15. So you've got 2 seasons kind of back to back in the same year. And I think it's going to end up being something like 40. So that's quite amazing, especially when you think that, like, how many shows make it to 15 seasons? Yeah, that far. And then on top of that, to increase the number of episodes per season. I mean, that's pretty much unheard of in cable TV, isn't it? So it gives you an idea of the popularity of the ideas and of the show itself. I mean, look, most Netflix shows now, as you probably know, they get cancelled after the second season, right?
Exactly, yeah.
You don't even get to see the end of them. They just disappear.
Right. I mean, they cut them off.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's quite astonishing. It's really nothing like it, nothing like it. And in terms of a bit scripted, so I'd say the one that actually, when I did the filming with the Unexplained Files with Science Channel, that was a bit more scripted, because I mean, they would sort of stop you, say, hey, can you say it more like this? Can you say it more like that? And you know what I mean? There was a bit more of that.
More drama.
Yeah, they would get to change it to try and sort of fit the narrative of the episode more, to be honest.
How many times they make you climb up and down that?
Yes, a couple of times. Yeah, not right at the mountain. God, I would have been in hospital if they said, now let's do all that again. Let's do the climb again. Oh God. No.
I
Um,
couldn't imagine.
that was tough. To be honest with ancient aliens, yeah, I'd love to go on some of the physical, expeditions. Obviously,
Mhm.
not necessarily as hardcore as the Science Channel one with the climbing up into the Caucasus to look for giant bones. That was definitely a hard hike. On the way
Sure.
back, my knee took a real pounding. To be honest, still have
Mhm.
issues with it now, years later. So,
Yeah.
um,
I
I
remember
learned,
the show you did down in Ecuador when you guys were looking for that temple and stuff,
yeah,
and that was that was quite a while ago now, but
quite a hike that was as
yeah,
well. Yeah,
quite an interesting episode though. I like
mhm.
that. Yeah.
Actually, I've tried to put myself out there. I know some people say, these days, most of us sit behind a screen, doing research. Which, yeah, I do. A lot of what I do is behind a screen, the computer, writing. But I've also put myself out there. I've been to I've been to Egypt. I've been to the pyramid sites, but also to sites out in Cairo that aren't normally accessed. I've been under the sites, in the
Mhm.
desert there. Been to Mexico, to Palenque, to the Yucatan sites. Been to Asia. I've done Angkor Wat, some of the other older Khmer temples and things, and of course, yeah, like I said, the Amazon jungle, the ancient ruins there in Ecuador. Georgia, this giant bones temple up in the mountains. So, I think I've done a good mix of both physically putting myself out there and sometimes putting myself on the line, because obviously there's implicit risks when you go hiking out into some of these places. One wrong fall and you got a broken leg or whatever. In the jungle, that's no laughing matter because you're in a swamp basically in the middle of nowhere where it'd be hard for even a helicopter to land. So the idea of being dragged out of a swamp for 2 hours, by
Exactly.
someone with a broken leg, that's just a nightmare scenario, right? So there's obviously risks. So I like to think that I put it out there, but try and get the truth, put myself on the line, but also a lot of work is done at the desk as well, So it's a good blend of the two for what I do.
Honest. Cool. Now, your Facebook page, is that the one that has the UFO skull kind of thing going on? Is that the one that
I did. Yes, I've got that on my author page, and then on my personal page is the one now with the 2001 Space Odyssey picture. So so people find both. Yeah, I've got an author page and the personal profile that people can see there online if they want to put a like on there or to follow me on there. Also, I use Twitter a lot, to be honest, as well these days. So if people want to sort of interact and ask me stuff, they can always find me there, which is like my handle there is Exogenesis and then HH, which is for like hybrid humans. I use that a lot. I find that's kind of seems to get more interaction. Since Facebook changed a lot of their algorithms and made it more difficult for people to kind of interact in some ways. If you're not immediate friends or family, that obviously they changed a lot and they've kind of, I don't know, I think that kind of damaged their model. I think a lot of people have found that. And then on top of that, of course, the privacy issues, that's put other people off. That's why I tend to have found that, Twitter's more active at the moment. So I use that a lot. And obviously people can interact with me there. And if they have like something they want to share or a question, I try to, give a bit of time to, addressing people's queries as well. Because of course, I know everyone has something they'd like to ask, particularly to researchers and writers, and it's not always accessible. So there's lots of people I'm sure that either of us would love to ask questions to, but they're not really accessible. It's very difficult, particularly people that are very well known, who obviously are often behind PR teams and admin teams, and your email goes into a spam folder. So I try to be kind of accessible myself. So it's cool because you find out things as well that you wouldn't know as well. Because I get experiencers, contactees, and people that have reached out and told me, stories about things that have happened to them, which is sometimes fits in with things that I'm looking at myself. Which is kind of always can be quite helpful. Sometimes that little bit of data that you wouldn't have got, that just fits into a pattern you're looking at. And it can be really important. So that's why one of the reasons I think it's good to run your own social media profile somewhere as a researcher, and not to be totally, invisible and behind, teams and websites. Because if you don't see what people are saying, you can miss out on a nugget, that's really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. What are some of the questions that people ask you when you're interacting with them and stuff? I mean, are they more interested in your anthropology type stuff, or are they more interested in the UFO alien stuff? I mean,
Definitely more of the alien stuff, and I think in general that
mhm,
has had more popularity. I think that the problem you have with the more more down to earth like stuff is that you're in a kind of gray area where the experts don't
mhm,
really want to deal with you, and then on the other side of it, a lot of the public either perceive that you're not like a PhD, or they are just you're not quite fringe enough, because it's not really about like lost civilizations or aliens, so you fall into, for me, that my work falls into a bit of a gray area on that one,
mhm.
where it's difficult for, I think, for people to think, how does he fit into what we're interested in. So I probably don't quite match the mainstream readers and a lot of the more fringe readers. So I think with the exogenesis and hybrid humans and those topics, it's more clear, and obviously there's a large interest in those topics. There's a huge global network of people that are looking into the story of, are we being visited, and that really there's only the fringe, because the mainstream just doesn't believe that there's any aliens anywhere near us, right? That they're not even, they don't even think that we've picked up signals of distant aliens, so there's really no gray area. You're either with the mainstream, who believe that aliens are far, far away and that we may never contact them, or you're in the more fringe, where you suspect that they're either already here or have been here, or
Right.
in the process of coming here or something. So I mean, in that, it's very clear. So people kind of, I guess, they know where I stand on that, and so I get more interest in that side of it. And so most of the questions and stuff are, yeah, people asking about that, and sometimes asking me why I believe the ET has been here, or what evidence is it that, how did that come about for me to be so certain of that. And obviously we can delve into that a bit, but yeah, I am very certain, as certain as you can be, about anything, right? I mean,
Sure.
people can always say, well, what about this little, hole somewhere in what you believe, and it's like, okay, yeah, fair enough. There's always going to be room for people to doubt stuff. I mean, you can apply that to almost anything in life if you really sit down and try to sort of debunk or ignore something, right? You could always find a hole somewhere that gives you an out, where you can say, well, that's not 100% definite and proven. Yeah. And you hear that a lot. So, people prove, they want you to prove something to them. And, is that proven? And those are like really, actually, to be honest, they're really like strong words, because in science, there's an awful lot of things that are not proven, right?
Mhm.
There's a lot of things that don't really have proof either. That's not a word that most academics will use for things. They'll talk about evidence, right? The weight of evidence. Have you got enough evidence to make it look like the thing is real?
Right.
Or true, but they don't necessarily say, is this 100% proven beyond any doubt ever? Because that's a really impossibly high standard for a topic, right? Especially for
They
things in
do.
the past. Yeah.
Exactly. There's a question here from you. This is from VJ Hoover, and I can actually show this. It says, Bruce, do you believe that aliens slash hybrids live among us?
I do suspect that we have, first of all, I put this, I think that we have aliens that live among us, right, of different types. I think in one respect, my position is, I think that some of the actual beings, the consciousness of aliens are here in totally human bodies, right? So you could walk past someone like that on your street and not know. So not, they're not going to have a big head or something like that. There are, in my view, there's people here who fundamentally their consciousness is not from here, right? And so they would be, totally looking like us. But if you interacted, you might find something, gives them away in their behavior or their
Mhm.
thinking, but you wouldn't necessarily know that straight away. Now, obviously, people hear about this kind of starseed phenomena and walk-ins and, and those kind of. But I do believe that. I mean, again, I don't know that I could actually. That's something I couldn't prove. Someone's like, okay, prove that right now. It's like, yeah,
Right.
I don't know how you'd really prove it. But yeah, I do personally. I choose to believe that is true. There's a few reasons why, but hybrids, I'm not so sure on what's going on with that. I mean, I clearly there's some kind of what we call a hybrid program. But I don't know whether that's physically in our reality, or
Mhm.
it's something that's happening in another dimension somewhere alongside our reality. And that when people have those experiences, are they being taken somewhere else? Because, there's a long history in shamanism and the occult of beings that take
Mhm.
people, like fairies and stuff, right? That, they come for you and they take you, or they take the children. You have these hybrid fairy children. And so, like, we have to ask, like, what's going on there, right? Because, that doesn't sound like aliens turned up in the 40s and started a hybrid program. It seems like there's something much older that has been
Mhm.
going on with humans and others, like, since the dawn of time. Now, I do wonder if that's not that in some way people are being taken, but to another reality, and that a lot of this stuff is happening somewhere else, right? So,
Right.
so if you were to try and look for these hybrids, or you were trying to look for these huge ships, you might not find them at all. They might not be, actually around our physical Earth. This might be somewhere parallel to us, and that there's a
Sure.
kind of a dimension. That's where I'm at the moment. Because I mean, look, some of the ships people see in those experiences are like miles long,
Mhm.
miles long. So I mean, you sort of wonder, like, how do you hide ships that are that big? Saying that, if they went past the face of the moon, you would see the thing. They're that big, right?
Sure. Absolutely.
So I don't know. I do wonder, but I'm not discounting that it could be also happening here. But I just feel a lot of that, if you look at the fairy lore and you look at all this stuff about, being carried off to timeless places with hybrid children, that just so old, and it just goes off into the shamanic side
Right.
of it. So yeah, I sort of say yes, I believe, but with certain caveats there on exactly how I see that as being, like, possible.
Yeah. She also asked a second question. She says, "Do you think it's possible that someone could be hybrid and not know it, thinking they are only human?"
Well, I guess if you are raised here from a baby, no matter what, if you were dropped off here from a ship, or you walk in as an alien consciousness downloaded into a human body, or however that happens, I mean, you're going to be socialized through the same system as everybody else, right?
Right.
Your parents, your school, your work. So, I definitely think you'd be in a conflict. You'd probably sense there was something not the same about you at some point. You might encounter information and it makes you think, like, I feel like something's not right. But I don't think you would necessarily straight away just think, I'm an alien, because if you've been raised as a human all your life, I could definitely see how, yeah, you would think you were a human, and that you wouldn't have any reason to question that unless something very strange, anomalous happened, psychic things, or you encountered a being, or, something that triggers that to you think, well, hang on a minute, I don't think my life's normal.
Right.
And obviously people have those things happen, right? So
Yeah,
is that because
absolutely.
some of those people are hybrids, possibly? That maybe that's why some people have a lot of phenomena happen, and a lot of other people don't have much, right? So, it's very hard to weigh up, in it? Because you could say that, are those people that have the most high strangeness, is that because they have a link to these
Right.
others?
Well, my theory would be that's about like the Rh negative bloodline. Everybody seems to think that that's some form of alien DNA and stuff. And I always thought it was introduced, to keep the inbreeding down throughout them,
Hmm.
throughout that particular species of human at that time, which
Hmm.
obviously didn't work very well. But I
Hmm.
mean, for a short time, obviously, it had some kind of effect on them.
Well, there's,
But
there's definitely research into the genetic lineage stuff, showing that
mhm,
some lineages. Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off, but just saying there's definitely
no,
research in them. Mhm.
yeah, for sure.
The way I look at that is, look, it seems like certain populations have more phenomena. For instance, there was, in the research of, like, John Keel, who did extensive UFO research. He found that there was more interaction between high strangeness and people of Native American and also Gypsy descent, and that
Mhm.
these populations particularly had more interaction with psychic phenomena. So why is that? I mean, we can only assume that there's something in the genetics, right? Something in the DNA that either predisposes the person to having psychic events, right, or is attracting these beings, and that then you have these things happen to you, or both, right? Some
Right.
kind of feedback loop where you're both more open and they're more interested, right? So there definitely seems to be some sort of genetic component, and there's some work going on at the moment. I mean, some people may have read that there's some initial tentative research that's being done by Dr. Gary Nolan and colleagues over in the US that have been looking at possible links with areas of the brain and phenomena. I mean, that's really interesting. There's a few articles out there. People look for Nolan on the basal ganglion, and that he is an area of the brain which it seems that in some people that it's a slightly different size or shape, and that these people in this initial group, which there's in the articles, were people that had contact or experiences with UFO type phenomena, and that they found there was a trend in those people that they had this basal ganglia was sort of enlarged, right? So it makes you wonder then, is there, is our brain differences and other genetic anomalies causing these things to happen? So there's some initial evidence to suggest that is true, and that perhaps Keel and others, were onto something, this idea that some populations, are somehow more linked to the phenomena that's going on. So that's quite fascinating. I think, we're at the beginning of probably a revolution in that way, that we can now research in that direction. And that maybe we'll find out that there's a whole load of different genes and different parts of the brain, that all correspond to why one person, is seeing, UFOs every day and ghosts in their house, and there's somebody else doesn't see any of it, even if there's someone else in the same house. What I mean? So there's clearly something is marking people out as different.
That's pretty awesome. Now, I know people like Stephen and Evan Strong down in Australia, and I know you're quite associated with them, or at least you were in the past. I think you guys even wrote books together.
We co-authored, Ancient Aliens in Australia.
Yes, exactly. Now, that they got these skulls or fragments of skulls that they've gotten here in the past couple of years, and they've been working on this, trying to figure out where they come from or what they were. Do you have any input on that at all, or what the findings are, or what you consider?
Well, from my point of view, with those kind of things, I mean, I think you really have to be like a trained expert on skull morphology. I mean, and so you have to be really wary if you use, like it just looks weird, because if I can say something looks really weird, and obviously, look, we had this like with the elongated skulls in Peru, right? That a lot of people saying they were aliens or at least alien hybrids and stuff. But when you careful analysis doesn't support that, right? It shows that they are human beings with a strange skull, right? That either has been elongated, maybe is in some of them possibly naturally elongated, but either way, the DNA is like 100% Homo sapiens, right? There's nothing weird in it. Nothing like you could say, well, the aliens have changed them. The most you could say is this is an unusual population of people. Okay, so I think we have to be really careful of especially because also there was a lot of claims that their brain sizes were bigger, but when you actually look at the data, that's not really true. That even though they have large heads, and on average they're at the high end of the human, the maximums, they are at the high end, but they're not actually outside of the variance within human beings, right? So although they have a lot of cranial capacity, it's not actually beyond the maximum known. So these things people wouldn't commonly know, because I spend time reading. Let's be honest, like most people don't sit and read academic papers. That's right, because they're not really designed for most people to read. They're dry and boring for the most part. You have to wade through a lot of text to get to the bit you even are interested in. You can waste a lot of time reading a paper that really didn't relate to what you wanted to know in the end. So look, I mean, in that respect, I'm probably a bit unusual for an independent researcher who actually spends quite a lot of time with those papers. And that's why, I mean, I would check these, and I find that, my own opinions were wrong, and I've had to change those in quite a few places, like with that. So I'm hesitant with those skulls in Australia to then put any kind of alien spin on it, but they definitely do look strange. They could be evidence of a transitional hominin, maybe like the Denisovans or some of a mix of Denisovan and modern humans. I think that we had Denisovans and Neanderthals in Australia, which is not totally accepted. Obviously now they're starting to accept that Denisovans were probably up in Papua New Guinea because the DNA is in Aboriginal Australians, right? Wow. 5% of the DNA in Aboriginal Australians in the north is Neanderthal. Sorry, it's Denisovan.
Hmm.
They also have like 3% Neanderthal, like the Europeans have. But that raises a big red flag as to like, well, why are they the only people with such a high level of Denisovan, right? The obvious answer is the Denisovans lived there.
They live there, right?
Yeah, and so if the Denisovans lived there and we don't know what the Denisovans look like, then that leaves a lot of range for if you find strange skulls in Australia, that they could either be Denisovans or they could be hybrids between Denisovans and modern humans. So, I mean, I would definitely be cautious to go beyond that to say that they could be aliens or alien hybrids, because you've got to discount that other possibility, which is the more reasonable one, right? So
Right.
only if we find Denisovan skulls and we know with DNA that's what they look like, and you compare it and you can say, well, this skull's nothing like that either, then you can maybe go down a more exotic routes, right? So I've learned to be more cautious, Clarence, over the years, because, you know, if you overstretch on one of these cases, you know, you can bring your whole credibility down. And that's the problem, isn't it? Is that if you go all in and you say, I think it's this, if it turns out it's not, as you know, then you are
I know that
terribly
feeling.
burned.
I definitely know that feeling.
Yeah, and we've all done it. We've all done it at some
Well,
point,
sure.
right?
You know,
So
you know, but that's the thing, that's what makes it, I'd say, fun. But you know, it's definitely a learning curve. You know, you find things you come up with, and you think, wow, this has just got to be the right answer. And then, like you say, you dig into this other scientific stuff, and you're like, mine ain't so hot now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I get that a lot with, if you think about the, look, I'll give a good example, like not to sort of upset anyone, but you look at the stuff to do with like Sitchin's research, right? Okay, one of the problems there, like, I know that you're not a huge fan of that either,
I'm
but
not.
one of the major problems there, and like this is like no offense to people that enjoy the books or anything, but the one thing he definitely didn't really do was deal with genetic evidence, right?
Right.
It's not dealt with. It's not in the books. He just says that he thinks that, you know, 400,000 years ago, these beings modified Homo erectus and they create the first Homo sapiens. But to say that with no DNA evidence is just totally meaningless, right? Because you have to be able to then go to all these genetic studies and match that up, right? Because if you just say and it doesn't match, then it's baseless. It doesn't mean anything. It's easily disproved, and that's the problem. So that people, if they don't rely on the actual, like the science, that then you have a very weak position later when the science, you know, comes around to you and says, well, how do you explain all of this? And you can't, and your whole argument just collapses in on itself, right? And that is the case with that, because like we know for you know, absolutely sure that there's no transition between Homo erectus at 400,000 years ago. There just isn't, right? Homo sapiens were already well underway, going back 800,000 years ago, right? So, and then that's not only in the physical record, in the fossils, which is absolute. Nobody can say, oh, the scientists are making it up, because you've got the skulls, you've got the bones, we can see the transition, right? But then on top of that, you've got the DNA now, and in there we see that the changes with the brain, you know, to create our brain and all that, those all happened close to 800,000 years ago. So how do you fit that in with a narrative where he just says it's 400,000 years ago? I'm not going to give you any like science evidence.
Nothing.
You know, nothing. Just going to tell you. And people have just, you know, have to be careful. I say go away and check that. And obviously other things, you know, with that, again, I spend a little time just to give people a bit what I call a very quick education in critical thinking, right? Because it's important in these topics. You know, I've had to learn it, you've had to learn it, everyone's had to learn it over the years. You realize, that you have to be critical. You can't just believe everything because it feels nice. You know, otherwise that's just self-delusion, right? So one of the things there is that, you know, the idea that these beings come for gold, right? The meme, the idea that you have aliens that come from another planet in the solar system, they want gold, they land in their rockets, they fill up, you know, use the slaves, they fill up and they fly off. Now, on the face of it, okay, you can say, oh, that sounds, you know, it's amazing, I believe it. But then you start pulling that apart and you think, well, hang on a minute. Gold is abundant in the asteroid belt.
Everywhere.
It's everywhere. They're finding asteroids that would bankrupt the planet, right?
Exactly.
They've detected some. They're almost pure gold and platinum and stuff, right? So if you fly through space, you can literally just be crunching up asteroids and just get all these materials without ever landing and having to deal with gravity and having to get craft back up. Now, also the other problem is, you know, I've seen when you launch a rocket, they are putting on there the lightest stuff they can get, you know, powdered food, man. Because they're weighing every gram of load that goes on that rocket because the amount of fuel you need to break orbit.
Absolutely.
And let's say you fill it up with gold, Clarence.
You're not going to go nowhere.
Right? Yeah, you're not taking off.
You'll be sitting there forever, burning a hole in the earth.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a problem. The idea a rocket ship can be full of gold and it can just break orbit it's not realistic. So because he was thinking about the technologies that NASA had at the time, so he talked about rocket ships, right? He wasn't talking about anti-gravity or warping space. He said they're rockets. They land in rockets. They take off in rockets. On top of that, in the time they're on Earth, which we assume is this 400,000 years, right? Mm-hmm. That they land in rockets, and how do they take off, Clarence? At the end, in those same rockets,
rockets, yeah.
Right. So in 400,000 years, their technology doesn't evolve.
Doesn't change. Yeah.
No. And look at us. Look how fast our technology changed in the last 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Absolutely. So how can they be frozen in time for 400,000 years?
Not likely.
No. So this is something we have to start critical thinking in these topics in ancient aliens. It doesn't mean that there's not evidence, but we have to get to the better stuff. And you filter out when you can find something that really just doesn't add up, and you can put that let's be honest, like anyone could poke a hole in it. If you went to the pub, you talk to your friend, and hey, I believe this, they're going to quickly point those holes out, right? So we have to be sort of a bit careful if we're going to say, look, I think this is a real scientific thing that happened, and there should be evidence for it. That we've got to be more scrutinizing, right, of what's being sold to us. And that's one of the reasons why I've gone down the route, particularly with the new book, which Exogenesis, Hybrid Humans, which is coming out June 1st this year. Cool. That, it's that's a kind of a blend there of I deal with some of the high strangeness, some of the psychic stuff. Talk about the abductions. I talk about some of all that, but I also go into the fact of like, for example, why scientists and SETI and people don't want to touch the UFO subject with a barge pole. And part of that is because it's really hard for them to get repeatable, falsifiable kind of evidence from it, right? I mean, obviously, part of it is the stigma. They just don't want anything to do with it, which we understand that. Yeah, that's you could say the unfair bit is the stigma. But then on the other side of it, the scientists that do want to look at it, then they're like, okay, so what do I have? And they look for physical debris of a ship or something. Okay, you hear about Roswell and a couple of events, but they can't get their hands on anything from that. So even if it exists, right, they can't get their hands on it. So then what's left then? They think photos, right? Scientists cannot use photos to prove anything, right? They're not photo analysis, right? They're scientists. So then they go looking for, what is there, biological material? They're none available to them.
Not going to find it.
No, it's not going to find that. And so in the end, there's very little that they can find. You've got a handful of scientists that have claimed that they have debris from ships, from crashed alien ships. There's a handful of scientists that are dealing with that. They're analyzing materials, right? There's radar signatures. Radar signatures are a kind of physical evidence. And then you've got, possibly.
Even that's not showing that it belonged to somebody else. Extraterrestrial.
Really. Just it's physical.
It could be, it's just a different style vehicle, which we've talked about here on this show, where I showed my theory about the Tic Tac spacecraft that was reported through the TTSA. And it very well could be one of our own unmanned craft.
And that's the thing. People look, and the average person, I don't know average, but the majority of humanity is probably more likely to believe it's like something we've made without any proof, or without any stronger evidence otherwise. Because, like you said, the other problem we have in it, of course, is that we don't have an alien craft on file that you can compare against. Right. So when someone says, I saw an alien craft, how do you know it was an alien craft? Oh, it looked like one. What does an alien craft look like? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
So
you always
by what other reports say. Yeah.
No. So you can't. So it's really hard. No matter how strange the thing is, you can't say for sure you saw an alien craft. The only ones where people can say that, and I can accept why they say it, is if you see something landed on the ground and what comes out of it looks like aliens, right? Then I understand why you're going to say to me, I saw an alien craft, because you don't really have another reasonable alternative to tell someone other than, it looked like a really strange craft. The beings that came out looked totally like aliens. I don't know, they had weird suits and ray guns or whatever, and at that point, the only thing you say is either they're having a visionary, psychic kind of experience, or there really was an alien craft, right? Because there's nothing else they can say to you. You can't say, that's just you mistaking a satellite or a plane. Because, obviously, landed in front of you with beings coming out. You can't mistake that for an aeroplane, right? So those are the cases where we have to say, okay, there's something very strange going on with those ones. But the ones where in the sky, I don't see how you can ever really get to the thing of saying those glowing lights, those are definitely alien craft. And I don't think that, again, the scientists can't accept that. We understand why, that is their job, is to really drill down with evidence and try and show something is really strongly inferred with solid scientific data. And that's why I'm kind of sympathetic in the book to them in that respect. I do say that we've got, and also with SETI, although we all get annoyed with them at times, but I mean, really, they're not set up for chasing UFOs around. If anything, the Air Force is in a much better position because they've got, supersonic planes, right, that can do that. Whereas, your satellite, if you're looking for radio signals, that dish really isn't designed to track, alien crafts or anything, right? So we have to be sort of a bit charitable and say that they're not necessarily the best people. And I think that, Dr. Eric Davies, who sort of, was connected with Hal Puthoff and, until recently he's moved on to somewhere else. But, he's for years been involved in some of these sort of secretive operations and, as a physicist and all the rest of it. He kind of summed it up recently when he said that as it stands, UFOs are basically an intelligence issue, not a science subject. Right. And that makes sense because you think about it, intelligence and military intelligence works very different to scientific analysis, isn't it? Because you don't, on the battlefield, you don't need to scientifically prove the enemy are there. You just want to find out, is there a chance they're there? You've got people spying. You want to know what's happening. Where are they? Why are the people moving? It's very different to proving stuff. You don't need to prove it. You just want to be ahead of the game of what's there. Is there a threat? What is that thing over there? Is it a problem? And that's where we're at with the UFOs. I don't think it's at, and I think he's right in saying we're not at a thing where you can say this is a science topic because we can't give enough material. We can't give the crash crafts, the dead bodies, the pictures of a mothership, firing lasers or something. Like, we don't have that kind of evidence where you can say now it's scientifically validated, right? Now, that's where I guess you could say someone like me comes in, where I think that what I'm dealing with now is the best scientific evidence that's available right now. And that's, I've got quite a unique case. I mean, I can give a quick overview, if you like, of why I say that.
Absolutely.
Essentially, it's a longer story, but I'll boil it down. There's a couple of things that really stand out as to why I say I've got the best evidence. There's 780,000 years ago, we know that the human brain goes into a sudden acceleration, and that's shown in the skulls of ancient hominins. We now know in the DNA that there's a load of changes that happen at the time, including the fusion of chromosome 2, but a lot of other DNA changes. There are genes that appear described as fully formed out of non-coding DNA, just like out of nowhere. Others that appear to be fragments of other genes that look like they've been cut, snipped, copied, put back in, right? These are all brain genes. Again, there's hundreds of particular differences between us and the other primates, and they're nearly all in the brain, right, in terms of genetics. So when you say like random mutation, random would be like in your kidney, in your leg, there's something about your spleen. Right. Yeah, if like nearly all of them is to do with your brain, that doesn't sound so random, does it, Clarence? You know what I mean? That sounds hyper specific, right? Exactly. You have a load of those occurring at the same time. Basically, you get this, from looking at it, looks like the upgrading of the hominins at that time. But on top of that, there's a whole series of events underway. Because at 780,000 years ago, you have a very strange set of events. Now, the first one that's most important here from my work is there is an object which appears in orbit around our planet, right? And this turns out to be made of something like 75% silica. Now, where am I getting this from? I'm getting this from a combination of NASA papers, independent geological papers, and others, because this thing explodes in orbit, right? So we have fragments being tested, it's called australite tektite, the remnants, and it turns out that this object would have been made of around 75% silica, like quartz, okay? Right. Now, at first people think, okay, so what? But there's two things with that. The first thing is no asteroid, meteorite, or comet ever detected has more than 60% silica content, right? Ever. Right, except for this one time. The second point is that large, and this is calculated to be about a couple of kilometers in diameter, this object, so it's big, but it's not moon size, but it's big. And if this is a comet or asteroid, like heltering through space, this, colossal speeds that these move at through our solar system. There's only two things that usually happen. They either slam straight into us or they bounce off, right? They get gravity accelerated and they just bounce off past us, right? And we use that on our satellites and stuff. We send out exploratory craft and they get a gravity slingshot off of the planet to go to somewhere else, right? So we understand that. And if you look at the information from astronomers, they say that the Earth is not massive enough to capture these kind of objects. Jupiter sometimes does, right? Sometimes it'll pull a comet into a temporary orbit and it'll fly out again. Earth isn't big enough. So there's a problem there. You've got this large object that swings into orbit around our planet, and then sometime afterwards it explodes in orbit. Now, how do I know it explodes in orbit? Because NASA did extensive studies looking at the form of this material. Some of it looks like, but it's called buttons, but they look like the front of a heat shield. Right? Okay. They're small fragments, but they're shaped like a heat shield. So they knew that they must have come through the atmosphere to get that shape, right? And there was NASA studies done in the 60s, which in the space program and stuff, because they realized that this stuff had the same aerodynamic shaping as their rocket cones and things would have. And what they realized is that how these were formed was that a source body exploded in orbit, melted, super heat, and then it was turned to a kind of silica glass, like a melted, liquid glass, and then it formed spheres, and those froze. Now we know what happens in the vacuum of space, right? Because if you've got water, and you probably haven't seen it, water flowing around in space forms spherical droplets. Look, planets form spheres, everything forms spheres in a vacuum, right? So they know this liquid material formed in space because it starts off as a sphere, and then as those rained down, and they say are basically a plane horizontal to the Earth, so they came at a very shallow angle, as though from a decaying orbit of the mother body, right? This is what they describe it as. They think the object exploded, the other things carry on in the orbit, but slowly it's decaying orbit, and they rain down, and they melt gradually as they go through the upper atmosphere at this angle. If they'd gone down too steep, they would just burned up. Because they come in at a shallow angle, they survive to the surface. And they said, well, they said that we conclusively show the only way these things could have formed is in an explosion in space, and is then, with the secondary melting coming down through the atmosphere. We know that they're made of an enormously high amount of silica. There's something, obviously not right here. It turns out, of course, that now if you look at the cutting edge of science now, of what they think extraterrestrials will be like and what their crafts, their technologies and everything, the speculation is vast silica networks with intelligent, AI intelligence living in vast silica networks. Right, so you think you stop for a minute and think, so hang on a minute, you've got this giant silica object that parks itself in orbit right at the moment, 780,000 years ago, this is dated to, right at the moment when the human brain goes into acceleration. Like, hang on a minute.
Yeah.
What's that thing up there going around the planet? What's in it, right? And it happens to be made of the same material that we expect advanced AI, aliens to be using to house their supercomputer artificial intelligences, right? And then on top of that, you have another lot of things that happen. Right after this occurs, there is a cataclysmic bombardment of our planet from all sides, right? There's meteorites, asteroids that slam in. They hit the Americas, they hit Asia, they hit Tasmania. There's I think it's about 4 or 5 major hits they've detected so far. This was detected only back in 2015, German geological study. Turns out there is a global cataclysm right around that same time, 780,000 years ago. Again, keep in mind, we're not talking about lots of different dates. This is all happening at the same period, right? We've got this cataclysmic event suddenly unleashed on the planet, right at the beginning of our species, and then just after that, you get a magnetic reversal. In fact, the last full magnetic reversal on this planet is dated to 780,000 years ago, right? So you now got there, Clarence, 4 major, huge geological type events, anomalous events, and they're all piled one on top of the other at the same point in time. Now, if anyone's going to look for a red flag, this is like a mound of red flags. Where, you're literally digging through them to see which is the most important. So you find yourself with this incredible set of events, right? Now, on its own, that would be enough. But the thing is, the reason why I was even looking at this is where it gets sort of, a bit stranger, because I wouldn't have known about any of this if it wasn't for the fact that when I wrote or collaborated on Ancient Aliens in Australia, I was connected to a lady called Valerie Barrow, who's an Australian. She's like a holistic therapist, psychic, regression therapist. I guess you could say someone who's into, the alternative stuff and whatnot. So, not totally outside of this kind of thinking anyway. But back in the 90s, she had this experience where she was visited by someone who was looking after an Aboriginal artifact, which they were trying to get back to the Aboriginal people. Now, her house was called Al Chiringa, and this lady saw a synchronicity there because it's a Chiringa stone it's supposed to be from the Al Chiringa time. She knew Valerie's house was called Al Chiringa. She asked, she wanted to be took there because she wanted someone to temporarily look after this object while she went for medical treatment. Now, obviously, she felt led to this house. She spoke to Valerie, and Valerie said, look, sure. And as I say, she's a fairly open-minded person who's, you'd say, like, I guess, open to holistic, alternative, and, strange things, right? So the idea of someone turning up with an odd artifact, looking after it, wasn't as strange as it might be to other people, okay? So she was kind of open-minded about spiritual things. She said, yeah, okay, I'll look after this artifact temporarily. And then this person went away. And she said that the thing is, then almost straight away, she starts having this voice speaking into her head directly, saying to her that, I'm the consciousness inhabiting this artifact, I'm a star person, and that this is an object left here from when we were here, and that there's a whole lost story of humanity that needs to be returned, and that this, that you are going to play a role in this. It basically gives her a whole, I suppose, what we would call a download, I suppose. Right. It tells her all of this stuff that's happened, this visitation. It talks about a giant crystal ship visiting the planet, talks about the ship being blown up in orbit, ambushed, blown to bits. Goes on to say, some survivors come down, survivors genetically modify an existing hominin on the planet, upgrading it. It says about that 5 years afterwards, a different group arrive running a kind of revenge enforcement mission on those that ambushed the ship, that they bombard the planet with asteroids. They pull them in from the asteroid belt. They bombard the planet. They hit the underground bases to wipe out this other group, that there's a kind of, a conflagration, a military operation on a scale that we can't conceive of. He said, these things make our nuclear missiles like pea shooters. They said, if they want to, we can crack a planet open with them. So, you sort of think of that. You think that we think we're pretty tough. Imagine one of these things just comes out of space, cracks our planet in half, right?
Yeah.
So we got to keep our arrogance a bit in check. And they do this. They bombard it. They fend off this other group, force them to leave, more or less, all of them nearly. And then there's this ongoing effort to upgrade the humans. And so this is all explained to her. But then the stranger, and again, if that's not strange enough, which is plenty strange, she's told that you will also get told this story by people you're going to meet. And she said after that, she started meeting people, not some of them through her clients, because she's a regression therapist. So some of them would be people she met, and they would have these memories. She'd be doing therapy, and they'd start telling her, I'm on a ship, I'm seeing these things. And other people, she said, was just totally random. Like she had someone come up to her in a car park at the shops and say, I need to talk to you, and sat down and started saying, I remember being this being, and I'm on the planet, and we're telling her all this stuff. She said in the end, she got the same story again that this thing had told her, but through different people, like about 40 people, Clarence. In terms of a collective reincarnation event, or whatever you want to call that, or if it's contacting people and putting stuff in their minds, I don't know how to interpret that. But either way, imagine that. So it's strange enough you've got this object talking to you, but then 40 people telling you the same story in bits, each of them having a piece of it and telling you it. So it was set up in a way where she couldn't really have denied that this was happening, right? So the first thing. But now, of course, she wrote a book about that called Al Chiringa When the First Ancestors Were Created, which was published back in 2003. Now, I only came to hear about it through Stephen and Evan when I did Ancient Aliens in Australia. I'd never heard of the book before, right? So then that was 2013.
Right.
Now, when I read it, there was a lot in there that stood out to me that I thought, I felt that it could be true, right? But I was also aware that she didn't offer any evidence, right? And she said at the end, if you just want to believe that this is a story and it feels good for you, fine. I'm not telling you should believe it because I'm not supplying any evidence, right? Which is quite reasonable. Yeah, very reasonable, right? But, take it as a story. But I thought, well, hang on a minute. If this is real and some of these events are on such a big scale, like, could they leave traces, and I thought it was worth checking out. And so what I said to myself is, look, if I don't find the traces, just drop this, just drop the subject, right? It's not worth carrying on with.
Sure.
Because there's hundreds and hundreds of stories, and I thought nobody needs another story from me or so. So I thought if I can check if this is like real, then that is like massive. And so I delved into it, and I started. The first thing I thought was, look, you've got a description of a huge crystalline ship blowing up, melting, raining down, and I'm thinking, well, look, is there anything like that in the geological record? And you're sort of thinking you won't find anything, obviously, because it's a long time ago. It's a long time ago. Did the thing even really happen? And so I was absolutely amazed when it turned out that there was a 100-year-long scientific mystery about this australite tektite material, with NASA involved, and all of this stuff. And it turned out that there's this anomaly that they don't understand. That there's this material that mysteriously links back to an object orbiting our planet that was made of crystal that exploded. When clouds, you just think, oh my God, this is actually real. Yeah, this is real. I mean, so straight away I knew at that point you're dealing with something real, right? But then one hit is not enough in a way, because it's such a problematic subject that somebody would just tell you that, oh well, okay, you got lucky. You got lucky on that one. Just a coincidence. There'll always be people saying that. So I thought, well, like, what else could you find? And obviously the second one there I thought is the asteroid impacts, because we know they tend to leave scars. But I was surprised because I'd never heard of something like that. Obviously I'd heard of the dinosaur event, the Yucatan, all that stuff. I'd never heard of a multi-directional asteroid like event, right? That sounded super weird. I thought we'd have learned about it at school or something. And it turned out that when she wrote that book, nobody knew there had been one. And that's why it wasn't well known. In fact, it was only discovered in 2015. So factor that in as well. She couldn't have known about it when she wrote about it, right? That in 2003, when her book was published, nobody knew that this asteroid impact thing had happened. They've only just detected it in 2015. And the weird thing is, on top of that, as if that wasn't weird enough, not only is the dating, again, 780,000 years, like the australite,
right?
Not only does it match what the thing said, that this happens 5 years later, it's happening at the same time, but it also says these are different asteroids, right? They're getting dragged in and bombarding the planet. So look, if this was a single asteroid breaking up and hitting us, which is what you'd think, right? Logically, if you're going to dismiss this, you'd say, well, poo-poo, probably a large asteroid came in, it broke up, and lots of pieces hit, and it looks like a multi-directional bombardment, right? But it turns out, when they sampled the different sites, right, Clarence, the chemical makeup was different. That these were separate asteroids that were hitting from different directions, exactly as the thing had said. That this is exactly, and the problem is they got no explanation for that, because it's so unheard of. Because usually we get one of these things every few thousand years. We never get hit from all sides by them, never. Right? That's totally unnatural. And like, there's not even an explanation in the paper. They don't even go there as to say, well, how could it possibly happen? They don't even talk about that. They just say, well, lots of these things hit all sides, and then we had that one. And then, of course, the third big one, which I thought, well, the must-have is the genetic thing, isn't it? Because it all means, it means a lot anyway, but it means not as much if you haven't got the link with the humans being made, right? Because obviously, in a way, that's the big story, isn't it? Because it's great that we've been visited. That's really important, really cool, but it's different to actually be connected to an extraterrestrial race by their genetic engineering. I mean, that's full on. That's like, oh my God, we're actually part of a cosmic community of extraterrestrials.
Right.
And so I had to delve into that, of course. And it turned out, obviously I knew from Forgotten Exodus book, I already had a lot of insights into human evolution. I knew a lot of the papers. I knew a lot of the anomalies. I had a big head start on that topic. And so, I was aware that there were things in there. And I did a deeper dig. And it turns out that not only are there the brain genes and all those things I just said to you, but there's another category called human accelerated regions, right? Which, again, they've been recently found only about 15 years ago, something like that. They've started to find these. And what they are is areas of code which have been hugely accelerated in their evolution, right? Wow. And they said that it gets really wacky, because they actually did, like, the lady who found it, she's a biostatistician, right? She writes the software that crunches the numbers on things, right, in biology. And right, so this is the sort of person who would be able to work out what's the chances of this happening naturally. And so she ran a program on it, and it came up as 0, right? There was a zero chance of it happening. Zero chance by any understood means for it to be that fast evolution on these sites. Now, I mean, I guess we're going to get a little bit technical, so I'll just clarify something here. But if you look, and there's a few articles out there, right? People can Google, like, if aliens were to leave a message in our DNA or to modify us, like, how would we detect that? And what you find is the experts will tell you is, well, because of the way evolution works, the mutations and stuff, if you put changes or a message in the normal functioning areas of the genome, right, they will be lost over time due to mutations, right? So over 1 million years, any message there would be totally lost, right? Or 10 million years or whatever, right? So if you wanted to leave something hidden in the human DNA that we could see, it has to be in a particular areas, right? Which is basically what we call highly conserved, non-coding DNA regions. And these are areas, when they say highly conserved, is that they basically almost never change, even between different species. You'll find these certain segments of code which are almost identical between different species because they're so fundamental to life, right? So if you want to preserve a message, or if we were going to find evidence of engineering, you're going to look in those areas because you probably won't find it anywhere else, right? And funnily enough, where do you think these HARs are, Clarence? Tucked right in those very areas.
Ain't that something?
Hundreds of them. And wow. A lot of them think that are to do with the brain. A load of them seem to be to do with the brain, right? So you're there again. It's like not only are they in the places where we'd expect to see a sort of a signature, but they're also calculated they shouldn't be there. And they're to do with this upgraded brain.
Sure.
And it's like, oh my God, you've got their hand in glove fit. So when you start putting these things together, you've got an alien artifact discovered by the Aboriginals, probably held by them since the beginning, because they say it's from the dream time, right? The creation time, the Alturinga time. That's their own, and you've got to keep in mind the legends around these objects. They say that these things are alive, right? That hold the consciousness of Alturinga beings from the dream time when the humans were created, that they're the most sacred objects. They are kept secret and away from everyone, only brought out by the highest initiated elders at specific sacred events, right? Because they're so powerful, these objects. And that now you've got one of them that comes in contact with someone and says, I am a being from the dream time, and that I have all this information, that I'm one of them, I'm the consciousness of the Turinga artifact, and that had been left here, and that now's the time for you to know what happened and what your species really is, where it's going. This is your open contact, sort of thing, if you like. This is contact. This is the invitation to understand your cosmic origin, and that you're basically, I suppose, considered ready for that next level of the conversation, and then it wants the information out there.
Right.
This is quite, I think, unparalleled, unprecedented, unparalleled, extraordinary, and it's one where the scientists are going to be on their back feet to try and debunk this, because usually you can just say you saw a light in the sky and it was a grainy photo, or or you read a book and someone said that you were upgraded or something, and you've got no DNA, you've got no evidence. It's like, hang on a minute, this is evident. This is
got it now.
Yeah, we got it now. So now come back. That's right. Come back to the table.
They got
to sit down, shut up, listen, right, and then they have to come back with an explanation, right? Which is, and the other thing, they can't just say, well, poo-poo, because aliens should be the last theory, which is what they will say, right? It's always aliens should be the last, because it's never aliens, right? That's the mantra. It's never aliens.
Here's the thing, Bruce, I don't mean to interrupt you, but why is it that some people like that will not believe that other, I don't even call them aliens, just call them entities, couldn't be manufactured someplace else? Why do they think that we're the only ones? I don't understand.
What is one of the main arguments they say is that it's not so much they don't believe they're out there, but they assume that they're so far, far away that, they can never reach us, and that, you'd have to have beyond light speed to get here. But you know what, it turns out, for a start, that turns out to be totally untrue, right? And this is a fairly recent thing. If you look, there's an article came out by a guy, and I think it's Dr. Caleb Schwartz, I think it is. If people can go away and have a look. Anyway, him and his team have said, look, that we didn't really factor in the fact that stars are moving, right, all the time. There's like a cosmic dance.
Yeah.
And they said that actually, if you look over the history of our galaxy, the stars have all come close to each other and stuff at different times. He said, in fact, a civilization could have easily colonized the entire Milky Way by now by using the fact that stars will come closer and they can just hop across, and they could have colonized the whole Milky Way. And in fact, they said probably they may have come this way before, colonized here, moved on, and maybe did an in-between period where they're not active here. And these are leading, cutting-edge scientists, right, Clarence? So the change in the story is massive, and a lot of people don't realize that, at the cutting edge, some of these scientists are saying, "Oh, we've miscalculated terribly." And actually, yeah, aliens could be everywhere. They could easily be here. They could have been here in the past. They could be here now. They could be coming next week. And that we've got that really wrong. The other thing is that if you put in AI, right, now the other thing is that they're realizing is probably most civilizations create robots, create AI at some point, and that what we will encounter most of the time is probes from those civilizations. And probes are immortal, basically, right? So they could be flying towards you for millions of years. It doesn't matter how long it takes. Right? If a probe set off 1 million years ago, it could arrive here now, right? There's no reason why it couldn't, right? So you don't need to go light speed. They could go really slow, but just been traveling for a long time.
Yeah, we got 2 of them. We got 2 Voyagers.
Exactly. Send them out, and they'll go forever, sort of thing, right?
Exactly.
And that's the thing again. So that's another thing they're factoring in. They're saying, well, maybe we assumed that there was just people like us and that they couldn't fly, 70 years and get somewhere. But if they're like technically immortal probes, they're AI self-aware probes, those things could travel forever, visiting stars. So that all these things are starting to change in that mainstream story. And they're now having to rethink this, because if you think about it, a lot of the things people are seeing in the sky could be those probes, right?
Yeah. Right.
So it's like, hang on a minute, you're saying actually they could be here and they could be monitoring, and people are seeing really weird stuff up in the sky, seemingly monitoring them. Now, I'm not saying that explains all of the encounters, it doesn't, but there's certainly some that fit that kind of narrative.
Absolutely, right? I agree. Yeah.
And then on top of that, right, so you've got those 2 points. Now, then you think, well, shouldn't we then be looking for evidence of what they call these technological signatures in our solar system? And nobody really does. What they tend to do is look far away. Right, but if we're accepting that aliens could have been here in the past, even if they're not here now, right? Because most scientists, if you ask, you say, well, would you accept that in the last? They might not accept that they're here now because they say the chances are so small. But if you say, okay, what about in the last 4.5 billion years of Earth? Well, yeah, there's a chance over that massive amount of time. So then when you start to look at that, you say, well, hang on, then why aren't you looking for old signatures of them? And they're not really doing that, and that's what my work really is. It's addressing the fact that actually, if you look through the really ancient prehistoric record, not just contact claims of Mayans or Egyptians or anything like that, which people can say is subjective or spiritual or whatever. But if you look really through the whole record, then you find that there's this anomalous set of events that 780,000 years ago, and you've got the signature of what looks like a technology, a huge silica object orbiting our planet, right? Exactly as they predict these things will look like, these silica networks, and it's there. NASA have the files, it's in their papers, and they have just totally gone, either they've missed it, which I assume probably, or they've seen it in there and they don't want to talk about it. One or the other.
They just don't say nothing. Yeah,
it's in their paper. Like, it's in their papers. I haven't just plucked this out of nowhere. I mean, it's this they did studies on this material, right? So they do know about it. And so now the thing next, of course, is how to get that out to the very wide public, because of obviously
people like you.
Yeah, the difficult thing is that, because of course, look, I can come on various like radio shows, like obviously I'm here and I go on lots of radio shows and I go on podcasts, but at the same time, without the reach of mainstream media, like you're not really gonna get this across to the 8 billion people.
Yeah, you have to be like Bloomberg and put it on every television.
Yeah. That's where we're at. That's the real problem now. It's not so much that we don't have evidence. I think that, in fact, I have very compelling evidence, and that almost anyone that I sit down and speak with about that is, at the very least, is left thinking maybe that guy's onto something. You know what I mean? Because I'm not saying, look, here's a grainy old photo, or look, believe me, I had a contact. Which I get that why people have a problem with that, because it's difficult, isn't it? It's difficult. Like, we've had experiences, you've had your experience, I've had experiences. I understand that when people can't accept it because they weren't there, and we can't prove it,
Right.
and I get that. But if someone says, well, look, but there's these physical papers, physical evidence, there's papers, there's studies, there's the biology, there's the anomalies, there's 0% chance of this, and yada yada yada. There's a point where you've got to stop and think, hey, this is actually real. And that's what I'm tending to get, is that a lot of people who tackle this now are starting to realize that, this is real.
This is real.
When the book drops, hopefully we're going to see a change in the conversation. And to be honest, I'd like the skeptics and the scientists to attack me. Please bring it on.
Well, they will. I guarantee it. Well, just like they did with your Exodus stuff, Bruce. Damn well they're going to
kill me with silence on that one. That's the other thing. Is that either don't engage and just hope the person goes away, right? Which is what they've tried to do on that one. Or they have to come all out swinging and try to make you seem like a totally bonkers crank, making it all up, pseudoscientist. So we'll see what they do, Clarence. Either they're going to do the same again and just be silent, or they'll come all out in calling me a crank and a pseudoscientist. And but either way, they'll have to address the fact the evidence is from their papers, Clarence.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's where you're getting this stuff from.
Yeah, exactly. If it's pseudoscience, it's their pseudoscience, because I'm using their papers.
Hey, I got a couple of quick questions for you. I don't know if you remember Omar from Watchers Talk. He writes to you. He says, Bruce, what's your opinion on Orius, Set, Isis, and Nephthys being biological artificial intelligence? And then he also asked about how about traveling through the stars of Stargate?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, one of the things that's described in the book and in Valerie's book, and I talk about this in my book, is that the craft arrives through a gateway. It's described as coming through a gateway. Mm-hmm. That is implicitly said that they enter a configuration of this kind of portal. They said they don't move as such, and then they're through it, which sounds to me like a warping in space time. So they kind of, they're 1 minute they're there, 1 minute they're in the rift, and they're just traveling, and then they're here, kind of thing. And obviously, you don't really get a sense of how long that takes. They don't say, but it obviously is some kind of rift between here and the Pleiades. Mm-hmm. That's when they jump off from. Now, it's also clarified, not all the beings on this ship are from the Pleiades, because again, I have this thing where people sometimes say, oh, but the Pleiades is a really young, hot star cloud. Yeah, it is. It doesn't mean that that's where they all live.
Exactly.
Right? That's just where they came from through their gateway. Now, and there's a lot, it's described as beings on this craft from all sorts of different places. They're different kinds of beings. It's a collaborative alliance of beings out there. And on this ship is various types. So they don't all live in the Pleiades. But evidently, once you can fly through space, you can colonize wherever you want.
Wherever you want, yeah.
So the idea that it matters how young the Pleiades is a nonsense based on human thinking. We assume they mean they evolved there. No, you can go wherever you want. If you've got Stargate technology and hyperspace and, all these things bending the reality, you can colonize wherever you want. So that is not a limitation. And that, in terms of the other things, I mean, biological, mixed AI, I would have thought that some of these from the descriptions probably are. There's descriptions of a robot kind of being that seems to be a crystalline being in a robotic shell, which is one of the crew and one of the beings. They're not all like humanoid. There's others that don't even seem to be fully there, that are like, interdimensional. You're really talking about, I guess almost like the Star Trek thing is that you look on board, there's not just humans, they've got all these different kind of beings. It's a bit like that, except even more weird, because some of them are not even physical, some of them are like a crystalline, right? So, I mean, I think out there, we probably have like this wide web of stuff. So, mixed bio, AI, I mean, why not? I think that you're going to find that there's all kinds of entities out there. And in the Egyptian gods, obviously, they come up a lot. And if you look at, through, obviously not in the Egyptians' lore, but if you look into the contact events and stuff, a lot of these Egyptian names come up with beings people say they interacted with, or they see visions of things like bird people, like particularly like Thoth, and stuff. It seems to be commonly encountered, that you get bird-like people. And again, Keel wrote a lot about this. I think he's got a book, hasn't he, about, something about a giant Birdman or something. He's in the title. I can't remember the title.
Man and Birdman or whatever.
Yeah, you think them off, and he dealt with a lot of these Birdmen. And you look back, and in fact, there's a lot of lore about avians and about bird people. I know that there's hoo-ha in, obviously in the cosmic contact thing about the avians, the blue avians, but that's not being pulled out of thin air. Let me just say that. I don't necessarily agree with the people that are talking about those subjects, right? But what I say is that they're not pulling it out of thin air. If you look in the ancient records, avian type beings, humanoid avian beings, come up a lot. They come up in different cultures, in Hindu cultures, in the Latin American cultures. They come up, all over the place, right? And if you look at the oldest cave art, in fact, some of the oldest engravings in the world include Birdman, right? So
Right.
there's something weird going on there. And look at all the indigenous tribes around the world. What do they wear? Bird feathers. Nearly everywhere. You go to the jungles, you go to North America, you go to East Asia, you look at these indigenous tribes, and they have bird feather headdresses. And stuff.
Yeah.
And they went right back. They found Neanderthals were making bird feather coats and things. And so this connection with the birds being sacred and something and contact is really, really old. So, I mean, I think that there's definitely something to the fact that a lot of these Egyptian gods are depicted as bird-headed beings and stuff like ibis heads, hawk heads. Look, I think there's something going on with the Egyptian deities. Myself, I think there's definitely a connection that they are ET beings. Right. That's what we're dealing. At least some of them, right? There's some of them based on contact experiences or older stories of these avians.
Crazy stuff.
Yeah, it is. I mean, alien stuff should be in a way, isn't it? That's the other thing is that people say, it sounds like sci-fi. Well, it is, isn't it? Because
it isn't. I mean,
it's like it should be sounding crazy, though, isn't it? Right? Because if it sounded it was just like us, that's when you should be really skeptical. When people say the beings were just like us and they fought just like us and they just want gold and they just want to, colonize, and you think sounds like people. Right?
Yeah.
Because, why would an alien be exactly like us? It's a bit. Those are the stories that are the most suspicious, the ones that don't sound a bit wackadoodle-doo, right? Because I mean, you'd think an alien consciousness is going to be pretty weird, and it's going to want things that we would find like incomprehensible, right? And behave in ways that are just totally extraordinary.
Sure.
And that actually should be what we expect. And I think sometimes people don't think weird enough, because again, I don't really thought, keep on too long. I want to clarify another point here. I mean, there's something that there's touched on. Again, this is to give you an idea like how weird things are at the edges of mainstream science, because a lot of people think it's just us in the independent fringe that are weird, that we talk about really crazy ideas. But like, if you look at the really cutting edge, I mean, the other week there was an article came out where a guy tackled something that I've always long suspected, but I've never seen anyone else say it. Is they said, well, look, if in the future beings like say humans or other beings, you get technology, you get your AI and all that, and you decide to upgrade, upload yourself into your technology, right? Which is obviously a thing that's been flowing around for a long time. The transhumanism, the idea that we merge with machines and eventually we upload our brains and our consciousness into metal and silica machines, right? And we become post-biological beings. Now, they've long thought that not only will we probably do that, but aliens have probably already done it. Right. So, but he sort of goes a bit further and says, well, look, okay, probably that has happened on many worlds around the universe. And maybe the beings themselves have died out. What's left is these post-biological silica machines. He said, but what if they want to come back? What if they want to come back to biological? Now, is there the reverse route? Could an AI create a biological shell into which it will download its mind back into a physical brain, back into the wetware, and go back to being biological, tired of its life of mortality, cruising the cosmos as this post-biological chunk of silica, that it might see that there's some value that it had missed out, in biological life, and decide it wants to download. I mean, when you start thinking about that, actually, well, it sounds like sci-fi. But yeah, actually, this is what the leading edge thinkers are thinking about, is stuff like that. And then you look at some of the stuff that I'm talking about here, giant silica objects flying around, creating biological humans. And, and then there's guys out there that, the PhDs and sitting there thinking similar things, but speculating, and that actually match with a lot of the stuff that we find in some of these topics, where you think, well, hang on a minute, it's because a lot of people do report interactions with AI, living ships, that the ships are alive, right? I mean, in ufology, you find a lot people saying that the contactees say, when we were on the ship, I just had this really weird feeling that the ship was alive, or they touched it and it was all squishy and stuff, and it seems like it's mixed technology biology, right? Indeed, in one account I've read is the ship seemed to eat an elk and it swelled up a bit as though it was an animal, right? Like it actually got a bit bigger, stuff like that. I mean, that's super weird, and people don't think about when they think about flying saucers. If you're a ship, with some beings on it flying around in the way that we fly around in airplanes, right? Again, because we contrast ourselves against aliens. But hang on a minute, that's not necessarily a sensible assumption. Also, we don't know if they don't just, let's say the ship's alive. I like to get people thinking, but let's say the ship's alive and
Right.
it comes here, it realizes that we expect it to be like humanoid beings, right? Because that's what we're used to. So it just 3D prints a fake crew and it beams them down or whatever and uses them to make contact.
Yeah.
I mean, remember where our own technologies are going, 3D printing things, 3D printing robots, that maybe they think, oh, these people wouldn't be able to handle talking to a living ship. I would just 3D print a pretend crew member and I would just AI control him down there and make him talk to them. Stuff like that. You've got to go into that real wackiness to try and think, well, hang on. A lot of these people report in their encounters, maybe they're pointing to something else that we're not putting our heads around. Because it's so strange, right? Because it's so implicitly alien that we're looking for something that we can bridge the gap, something similar. And maybe they also do that and try to bridge the gap by giving us similar things, by saying, okay, well, I'll present to you a physical, biological-looking being. And like the Greys, and people say a lot of times they don't seem to be alive. Like some people say they seem to be like androids of some sort, like automatons, right? That don't, again. So again, is that because are they the pretend crew that they just send down that they're controlling? That the ship itself is controlling them. And that it's definitely that really they're just automatons that are used for a little while and then just melted again, in the back of the ship. Or who knows, right? And I want people to sort of really to question assumptions. So again, I think to get forward in this topic, we have to be really careful because there's a lot of narratives that we've become used to, and that the scientists have given us narratives. This thing about not being able to cross the distances of space, which has collapsed, and the idea that you couldn't live long enough to get there, that's collapsed. Now we know with AI and stuff. We know that now there's 3D printing. We're getting intelligent materials that can shapeshift, right? And people keep saying they see these ships shapeshift, and that the ships can be see-through. And now we're getting materials that can turn see-through and then turn back to metal. And stuff. So look, we're on the edge where you start to recognize some of the things that people have been saying for the last 50 years, right?
Well, even we made camouflage that they were going to introduce to the Army for clothing that's reflective to the point of they look invisible.
Exactly. Yeah,
the same kind of thing. We got green backgrounds now that you can use as mirages and stuff. So I mean, what would be the difference?
Yeah, so that's where we got to go with that thing. I think people have got to just, I hope, will stop and start to think about some of this stuff and start to you put those different pieces together and you start thinking, hang on, a lot of stuff that just used to seem so wacky, it actually makes a lot of sense when you put it into context. And some of the stuff that doesn't make sense, that's okay. Because, like I said, if it's real aliens, it shouldn't make easy sense all the time.
Well, it's not going to, right?
No, it's not going to. If there's any kind of level, even if they're interdimensional or they're crypto-terrestrial or they're extraterrestrial, whatever, if they're different enough from us, they haven't evolved alongside us, then we don't know them, then there's going to be some real differences there. But
absolutely.
It's totally bizarre, and what they do is bizarre. So I don't know. Hopefully that helps. But so, I mean, really, I guess the big thing now, of course, is what will the reaction be when the book comes out? I mean, I guess where are you at on that? I mean, does it get you thinking? I mean, what do you think, Clarence? Thinking about that?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you know me and my theories. I mean, I do all kind of crazy stuff, and I come up with this portal wormhole theory for people. It puts a lot of things in the same basket, so to speak, and whatever, different things. We just happen to have Steve Meads with us in our comment section here. Steve did a lot about the caves there, the Shavik caves.
Yeah.
And he says here, "Hey Bruce, been reading my book? ? Sounds as though we got everything found right in front of him.
I've not, to my shame, read it, but I've seen pictures that Steve kindly shares online in the past. So I'm aware that he's argued that there's imagery relating to extraterrestrial contact in cave art at different sites, particularly like you've just named. And as he points out, the Birdman, Easter Island. They've got Birdman is quite a common theme around the world. The Birdman is particularly. I think he's point. Let's go, Chevelle. I think that's the one. The really famous one. You've got two images. You've got a Birdman next to what looks like a bird on a stick, and then next to that is Taurus the bull with the Pleiades over it.
Right.
Which is a really important one. It's a really, really ancient. But you also find as well, recently they found some of the oldest rock art in the world down in Indonesia. And again, it's a bull with the Pleiades over it. Yeah, I mean, that Pleiades and the bull link, that's another one that keeps coming up. In fact, the Pleiades link is all around the world. And, not obviously in the really, really early cave art, but also in the ancient cultural lore. That comes up again and again, that we've got the link to the Pleiades, the bull being Taurus, and the leg of the bull being the Pleiades and all this stuff. That keeps coming up. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Again, that's another thing where you have to say, well, why is it that cultures all around the world highlight this one little faint glimmering patch of stars in the night sky? And you sort of think about that, because the Pleiades are not even that bright, right? You sort of got to strain to look for them a lot of the time.
Now they're not, but who knows what they were thousands of years ago.
Some of them are just, they do think in the past possibly can see more. There's a lot of different stars in that cluster. But if you think about it, what's the most obvious stars when you look up? I would say Orion.
Or
it stands out.
Yeah,
it always looks like an arrow sort of pointing. And if wherever you look at it, those three belt stars of Orion, they really stand out. So, I mean, if you were thinking that people, let's say simple-minded early people, that they looked up and then they were looking for a special place in the heavens, I would have thought they would all go for Orion, because it's just the most obvious. Really stands out, very bright, clearly has a shape to it. You've got this line of stars, another small line of stars next to it, and then obviously the four bright corner stars, almost like a box around it. I mean, really stands out, extraordinary. And yet so many cultures instead say, oh no, it's the Pleiades that's important. Now, why is that? If it was just random, if it was just random and it was just people looking up and making up stories, it's funny how they've all gone for this one little patch of not very bright glimmering stars of the Pleiades, right? So
somebody had to teach them, because they wouldn't have known anything about it just by looking up at the stars. I mean, honestly, on any given night, anybody walks outside, unless you notice, like, the biggest ones are like the Big Dipper and the Little Dipper, things that you would actually know by looking at. Pleiades, you wouldn't know. You're not just going to pinpoint and go, oh yeah, that's the Pleiades star system. You have no idea what you're looking at.
I think that what happened is, and again, it's obviously speculation, but I do think that, at some point when it's visitations or whatever, that, someone has probably pointed, they've pointed out where we come from over there, that's where we're from. Because you couldn't really explain to early people, like, exactly how you did this.
Right.
Because you could probably point, like, there, and so, like, they wouldn't really understand what was there or how beings got from there, but they would probably mark that as a really important place, the place of the ancestors, right? So if you ask these people, usually it's the place of the ancestors or the place of the dead or the place from which the gods came, or the narratives overlap. It's always something to do with special beings either came here or our ancestors or something, right? So you could probably get that bit. And also the other funny thing is that a lot of the time you find there's a connection with descriptions of what sound rather like wormholes, that they say, there's either a serpent rope that connects, or a tree trunk, or a tunnel, or something like that took the beings back to the Pleiades. And you get that a lot in Aboriginal Australia and stuff. The stories usually the seven sisters escape back through either a tunnel or up this tree trunk, and all these descriptions that sound like a wormhole that opens up and goes back to the Pleiades, right, and stuff like that. So again, simple interpretations of a complex story, right? Because if they're saying, we travel through this thing and it's, takes you to the, and like we come up with the most similar thing we can think of, like a rope that goes between them, right? And stuff like that. So again, I think a lot's been encoded into those legends, and now what we're finding is that it's not just encoding the legends, but there's those physical remnants that I can point to and say, look, that's from a ship. I mean, one of the extraordinary things is, I have pieces from this object in my house, so I'm like, as far as I'm concerned, I have pieces of an extraterrestrial mothership in my house. So for me, it doesn't get more physically real than that, right? That I can pick it up and I know the story of that. I know that it's anomalous. I know that this intelligence has said it's from the ship. I know that it matches exactly a ship exploding in orbit. It's made from anomalous material, all the rest of it. There's a point we've got to say, well, that's the piece of the ship. Right, and unless a scientist can really come up with some way of explaining that all away without just saying poo. It's never aliens. Right?
Yeah.
It's real science. It's just saying, well, no, because of the X of this chemical and this, blah, blah. And they'd have to have something really serious to just undo that, right? And so far, nobody's had anything, right?
Exactly.
I have nobody that sat down and said, well, Bruce, you don't know about this and blah, 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 and obviously it's this, and nobody.
Hey, Steve came up with an answer there for us. He says there is a large arrow pointing in Orion's direction. The Pleiades forms the bottom of the arrowhead. I need to show properly, but the arrow is huge. Oh, okay, cool.
Well, Orion's definitely part of the story. Look, I mean, again, if you look, and I go to the Aboriginals, but I mean, they say that Orion, the hunter, chased the seven sisters of the Pleiades. Now, most people will think, hang on a minute, don't you mean ancient Greeks? Because the ancient Greeks have that exact same story.
Exactly.
Orion the hunter chasing the seven sisters, right? But no, there's the older version of it is there down in Australia amongst the Aboriginal Australians. But the exact same narrative, this hunter pursuing one of the sisters, right? And in the sky, you see Orion pursuing the Pleiades. But how on earth, looking up, do you happen to see a hunter, right, and seven women? You don't, do you? Like no stretch of the imagination, right? Do you look up and could you see that in Orion and the Pleiades, right? So this is a story that they've got from somewhere else that they know is linked to that. And what I am of the opinion of, and again, this comes out of this research, it's explained quite clearly that there is a group in Orion that has been a conflict, a hot war in the past between this other alliance that is centered around this Pleiadian Stargate, that they have had hot war in the past, and that so this idea of Orion pursuing the Pleiades is an inference to a literal cosmic conflict that has happened in the past, and that there is not the friendliest situation between these two star systems, and that's why we have this narrative of connections between Orion and the Pleiades, that there are Stargate networks that connect to different parts of our galaxy, and that those two have points of the network there. There's beings that are clustered around Orion, other beings clustered around the Pleiades, and that they do sometimes come into conflict. And that, in fact, when this bombardment was done, it is described that those leaving the Earth jumped through the gates back to Orion. So during the bombardment, they said, get off the planet, we're going to bombard. And they said, and the beings, they left through their gateways back to Orion. So that there's been a hot conflict between Orion and the Pleiades in this narrative. Again, those are the bits I can't prove. I'm not saying. So the bits I can stick with and say, well, the evidence is there for the ship, for the engineering, for the bombardment. The rest of it, you have to sort of say, well, I can't prove it. But then, if someone tells you the truth, mostly, right. And you're inclined to believe them on some of the other stuff, aren't you? You know what I mean, Clarence? So the way I look at it is, if they can prove themselves on the big pieces, then on some of these smaller bits, I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that, okay, well, we do find that story comes up a lot, funnily enough, and that even in this thing of the Aboriginal story of Orion pursuing the Pleiades. And so it's not just in that contact information, it's in cultures around the world, right? We also know that, I suppose in contact events as well. When people have contacts, they sometimes talk about there being different alliances, right? I mean, I've read in people's claims, they say, these beings sometimes talk about there being an alliance out there and also another group, particularly this Draco, which comes up quite a bit. And that's talked about in it. They talk about the Draco. They talk about them being this hostile species that is responsible for creating a lot of the other beings that are hostile, like tall greys and reptilians and other insectoids and all sorts of beings that they have created. And then on the other side of it, you have these other beings who are kind of the Elohim, which are another like a multi-dimensional collective, which is kind of almost like the wise elders of this alliance, right? They go to them for their counsel, right? This is all talked about in Valerie's book, right? So, I mean, take it or leave it, but they talk about there being these two different collectives, and that unfortunately Earth is within a very dark sector of space. They said that the beings in our sector of space are very dark, very negative, a lot of service to self entities, and that's just unfortunately where we're at. And that part of this mission to Earth was to gradually bring a better circumstance to this part of the galaxy. Right. And that, that this is, let's call it outreach, like evangelic outreach, if you want. That'd be the closest parallel would be that, is that they're trying to bring a bit of the better way of doing things to what they consider to be a very dark sector of space and to a group that they have historically had conflicts with, but they are trying to bring about better circumstances in this part of space. So I mean, that's what they talk about. I mean, again, people don't have to believe that. I don't want to sort of say, oh, because I've said this other bit's true, you have to believe any of this stuff. You don't have to, but that's just what they say in this other material, right?
Sure.
So take it or leave it.
It's pretty cool. Good deal. Omar says, what was it? He said, personally, I think humans originate from the Andromeda galaxy, migrated to the Milky Way, such as Orion, Pleiades, among other star systems. Cool.
I mean, I struggle with that because obviously people say things like that, and also it's like maybe coming from Mars and things like that. The problem you have is that if you go into the DNA, if you go into the genetic studies, right, then you just cannot hold those opinions anymore, because what you find is that it's very clear that genetically we link back to Earth life.
Always Earth, right?
Well, because we share a common ancestor with all life on this planet. Right? So the problem is, if we were brought here from somewhere else, we would have radical differences in the genome, which would show that we are not related to the other species closely, right? Because we wouldn't be closely related to them. Well, we would be from somewhere else. So you have a problem. You have to try, and then you have to argue, how could you bring what would be technically an alien, put it on another planet, and that it'd be related just as much as the chimps and the foxes? And it doesn't really, that's the problem, Clarence, is that once you go into the science, like I do, all those kind of things fall away. You realize that they don't fit unless you abandon all science and then just go on whatever story you prefer, right? Which then you can do, but you have to choose. The way I look at it is you either choose to use science, right? In which case your arguments fall apart if you have to accept. If the science doesn't agree with you and you're using it to support your arguments, then you have to drop your argument, right? Right. Otherwise, you have to drop science entirely and say all of the DNA evidence is lies, all of the scientists are lying, and that's the only way you can do it, that you're fit with humans coming from Mars or from Andromeda. Right. But I don't mean to people, but if you dive into it, you realize that we're so closely related to the other, like a chimp, right? It's like 95% related to us. That would not be the case if we came from the Andromeda galaxy. It just wouldn't be. We would maybe have 0 to maybe 0.1. If DNA was even shared by aliens, we don't even know that DNA is something aliens have. It may only be on this planet again. So I'm very wary of those things. That people can be free to believe as they feel fit, in the same way that people can believe in different gods and stuff. But you are going into that realm of faith where the science is totally against it, totally counter.
Well, here's something though that just crossed my mind as you're talking about that with the DNA. Now, we had 2 astronauts that were identical twins. One stayed at Earth and one went up to the International Space Station and spent quite a good amount of time up there. Now, when he came back, they checked his DNA, and it had actually changed compared to his.
It did have some slight changes, yeah. They were pretty slight, but I mean, it did have some little changes from being in space. But yeah, I mean, he said himself later that the media had overplayed it, though. Because unfortunately, the media hyped it a lot more than actually happened. Yeah, as they do. Clickbait headline. He said when you tackle it, look more. He said it wasn't anything as drastic as the way the headlines were trying to say it was. But yeah, you would have to look. There's slight look through epigenetics. Like you can have in lifetime genetic changes. Like if you live in a famine, like say you like now, like food collapse. We're in a famine, but that will actually change the way your system functions. Like your DNA will adapt, and it will change how your genes actually work to a degree. So you to cope with famine better, and your children, if they're born to you while you're in that mode, they will inherit those changes in the DNA to adapt to that thing. So that's quite amazing. They have realized now that DNA can adapt in like real time, right? And that those traits are inherited. So even it's not just that it's changed in you; it can change. So if your children, your grandchildren, I think down to like 5, 6, 7 generations, maybe more, right? But this is what they're at with the science of it, maybe more. Right, but we do know that that's it. But there are some slight changes. So DNA is, I would say, it's like, to me, it's like an intelligence, right? I mean, they don't look at that. I mean, I look at it as an IT background guy, right? I look at it like a code, an intelligent code. In fact, I would say it is a kind of AI, right? Because I think DNA was created. I think it was seeded on this planet. I think it is a real code, and it was really engineered by an extraterrestrial intelligence, and it is self-aware and intelligent, and that's why it can self-rewrite. That's why it's so adaptive, in the same way that if we create an AI code, it will be adaptive, self-aware, it will be able to change itself, reprogram itself, things that DNA does. Like, so you think about it, it would behave much like DNA, and like so that's kind of funny if you think about it. And I consider DNA to be a planetary terraforming technology created by an advanced extraterrestrial race, because all you need to do is spray it down on a barren planet and it terraforms it.
Sure.
Right. So I mean, that's what it does. You only have to seed it on planets across the universe, right?
Well, that's what they're claiming meteorites and asteroids do. That it
carry this material. Yeah.
So it brings it right here.
They do it. You can start seeding planets, and if you're the kind of look again, this goes into this kind of, if you've got wormhole travel, that means you've got time travel. So you could do weird things like seed a planet, travel through your wormhole to the future of that planet, and then land again, right? So you could literally have the same beings that seeded the planet turn up and live on it, right? It's really wacky, because people think about 4.5 billion years. But if you're bending the fabric of time-space just to get around, then you can do extraordinary weird things like seed planets and then come and live on them, like next week. Because you don't need to wait 4.5 billion years. You just travel through a rift in space-time. So there's every reason to think that once you get to a certain level, you could go out seeding new worlds and colonizing them and stuff, like really weird stuff like that. So I think we have to, again, it's that thing about expanding the mind to think about really like type 3 civilization technologies, harnessing the power of stars and bending space-time and seeding worlds and not human level thinking of collecting gold or needing water. So like those things are taken care of once you can fly around in space. I mean, there's more complex issues like uploading your consciousness, wanting to come back, creating a biological humanoid race to then download into, weird stuff like that. That's where we should be at in terms of thinking what's going on. We should be asking those really weird questions like, could we be the save point of a post-biological intelligence that wants to come back to the biological reality, and so it's engineered these bodies to download itself into, and that we are the downloaded extraterrestrial consciousness living on a terraformed planet of a type 3 civilization. Like when you put that in, you think like, Jesus Christ, that actually meshes with a whole lot of the weird stuff that people are reporting. I'm not saying that it is that, but you know what I mean, Clarence, when you have to start thinking in that level of like high stress.
Yeah, absolutely. But to get people to understand you when you do that, that's the next step. I mean, that's the hard part.
It is, and look, obviously, I'm going to come up against not only the mainstream, but a lot of the thinking in the fringe. It doesn't necessarily agree. I mean, but the way I look at it is to politely disagree, and like if people can basically show that their argument's better than mine, I will fold to their argument. Right? I'm not looking to start a UFO cult or something, or that kind of. Look, if someone shows me, look, Bruce, you've got something wrong on this bit, that DNA, blah blah blah, that doesn't work out, and they can categorically show me, then like I'm not going to just keep going with it. I would say that's wrong. I need to change that bit. So I understand like some of the stuff, like the Sitchin people won't like what I'm saying. Other people who think we came from Mars won't like what I'm saying. You can never please everyone, but
you're not to, right?
No, but I will stick as close to the truth of the data that I've got. And like I said, the narrative is broader than the data, but I can't prove the rest of that story. I can only say that's the rest of what they said. Right.
Right. Okay. So what's the name of your new book? You got
so Exogenesis Hybrid Humans. I think I probably better shoot and let you go as well. But Exogenesis Hybrid Humans, that's coming out from New Page Books June 1st this year. And obviously doing, shows and stuff, so people can follow me up until then, see what I'm talking about. But obviously we've covered a heck of a lot of what that's about. So people have a good sense of that. And hopefully, people go out, obviously I'm quite happy to share most people don't want to share the core stuff of their book. They want you to wait until it comes out, right? But I'm sharing it because I think it's really important that people know this. And also, I would hope people will support this effort, still buy the book, even if you know what's in it, and, encourage other people to buy it. Know that, you are supporting really what's I say cutting edge work that is ongoing. I can't keep it going without people helping because I'm self-funded, broke. If I'm honest, so I'm self-funded. Every bit helps. That's why I need to sell books. Otherwise, can't function. Like everyone else. But yeah, I will give away the information as well wherever I can. I tell people, share it, radio shows, all the rest of it.
Awesome stuff.
Cool.
Well, buddy, I hope you let me know as soon as it does hit the shelf, because you know me, I'll be on it.
Yeah, I certainly will do, and I appreciate you having me on and let me ramble on and rant for so long. But anytime. Like I said, it's been a long time since we had you on back in Blog Talk days. I mean, that's going back a number of years. I can't believe it's been into this long. It's kind of ironic to think. It's good. At least now, Clarence, I've come back with really good stuff to give to you. Hopefully, it's worth the wait.
It's awesome stuff.
Well, I really super appreciate it. I'm going to have to fly because I know that family will be expecting me to do certain chores, and life beyond space down here still goes on, with, mundane day to day. So I'll let you carry on with your day as well. But yeah, appreciate it. And again, obviously, we'll keep in touch and speak again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Okay. Take care.
Everybody. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. So, we got to keep an eye out on his new book. And, awesome stuff. Hey, give me a comment on what you guys think of our new platform that we're running on right now. It's awesome stuff. We got another show tonight, 6:00. So please follow us with that. But get a hold of Bruce. If you guys have any questions, send him his email, and stuff like that. So, but I love his work. Him and his wife both, they're awesome people, and just really good stuff, good content, good quality stuff. So, keep that in mind. Yeah, I'm not the only one that thinks like this, folks. There you go. Yeah, it's great. Awesome stuff. So in the meantime, until we see you tonight at 6:00, I want everybody to please to take care and enjoy yourself. So thank you very much. And until then, stay safe anyway. We're gonna run on out of here and I want to thank you all for listening to Closer Encounters. Please remember to like, follow, and share. And until we meet again, keep your eyes to the skies. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Tonight, 6:00, be here. Another show.